Okay, today we're going to begin our discussion of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment is a completely new way of thinking. It's the scientific revolution in the world of politics. Scientific revolution was primarily concerned with astronomy, with physics, these big ideas that really, at the end of the day, as we discussed, didn't have a huge impact on people's lives. Now, the concepts, the ideas did, but actually where the planets and that they move in ellipses, like, I still got to farm. I still got to feed my family. But the Enlightenment is going to bring these ideas, bring these concepts of questioning authority and of use of reason into the realm of politics. And that's a key word there, is using reason. Reason is going to have to justify political and social issues the same way that the scientific revolution required evidence, required the use of evidence. So again, that's how these are tied together. Now, it's important to remember that the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution didn't happen separately, that these two overlap and they're happening at the same time. If we look at Newton's Principia, that big important word, it was published in 1687. Locke's Two Treatises of Government, which is going to be one of the big works we talk about, one of the foundational, one of the seminal works of the Enlightenment, was published just 2 years later in 1689. And so this is really going to change everything. This Enlightenment is going to bring this into a social, political context, whereas the scientific revolution, it was much more abstract. It was much more celestial. So where do we start? Let's start with the theory of natural law, because this is one of the fundamental ideas of the Enlightenment. And our goal for today's lecture is to understand Hobbes and Locke's contribution to the Enlightenment and be able to compare and contrast their ideas. So natural law is a very big kind of abstract concept that's difficult to grasp. And so I'm going to explain it to you. I'm going to lay it out to you. And then we're going to talk about it. Then we're going to get a chance to put it all together. So if it feels slippery as we're going through it, don't panic. Just wait and give it a chance to kind of coalesce. So let's start with the definition. Natural law is a universal law that distinguishes right from wrong. It's a universal law that distinguishes right from wrong. So that's a very big idea. Now, the natural law uses reason to analyze human nature and deduce binding rules or moral behavior. So it's using reason to find rules to run society. Now, this is an example of a universal law. These universal laws were popular because of the scientific revolutions, these set of laws that people were governing or people were discovering that govern the whole universe. And so this is a very much connected to the scientific revolution. So what this natural law is saying is that right, that being just, is natural. It's not man-made. There's a universal law that is a concept of what is right and wrong. And the idea is that any country, any leader, any court can be unjust because right and just exist above and outside of the government and outside of the law. And that one can detect unfairness of man's law by comparing it to natural law. And so natural law, again, this universal law code, is saying that just because something is a law doesn't mean that it's just. We have to compare it to natural law. Now, of course, different philosophers, that's what we call Enlightenment philosophers, different philosophers are going to have different ideas of what is right and just. But they're all trying to compare it to this idea of natural law, which they're going to have different ideas of. So if we're talking about the government of France or the government of England or the government of the Dutch Republic, people might have different views of their government and how close they are to natural law. What we're seeing here is that this is a moral code that's disconnected from Judeo-Christian beliefs. This is the idea that there is a right, that there is a moral correct that's not based on Christianity, that's not based on the Bible. It's based on this universal law. Now, the reason that philosophers felt they had to do this, felt they had to discover and describe natural law and compare it to the laws of man, are because their belief that the state was not natural. The state was not a natural thing, and it had to be justified by reason. It couldn't just be justified by religion. Divine right could not justify a state. You needed to figure out how it worked based on reason. Now, take a second. Talk with your partner about what this concept is. It's not a book. It's not a single work. What is this concept? Go ahead. I think another great way to look at this is the way the state had to be justified by reason. Compare this to the scientific revolution's use of evidence. How are these similar? The fact that these philosophers are trying to justify the state with reason, how does that relate to the new requirements of evidence that were brought up during the scientific revolution? So go ahead and have that conversation with your partner. Oh, I'm still here. This idea of natural law is going to come out of a faith in human reason. We're actually still up here, sorry. It's going to come out of a faith in human reason. It's this idea that human beings are rational animals, that we are rational actors. And it comes from the idea that progress is possible. We remember this idea from our big 18th century culture lecture, hopefully, that this is beginnings of the belief in progress. Well, the next conversation I want you to have is, what is possible? If you're examining the state, if you're examining natural law, what do you think is possible? Go ahead and have that conversation. Okay, now, this concept of natural law, now that hopefully we're getting it a little better, it's going to become part of European mentality, at least of political thinkers. It just becomes hardwired into them, and it becomes almost a given. And it's actually going to be used by supporters of both absolutism and constitutionalism. And so no matter where you are on the political spectrum, you're going to use this concept of natural law to try to justify your state. So now, let's talk about Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes, once again, as a reminder, is a pre-Enlightenment thinker. We've already talked about Hobbes. I want you to take a minute with your partner and talk about what you remember about Thomas Hobbes, his view of humanity, his philosophy, what he supported. Talk about that, because that's going to be forming the basis of our conversation here today. Okay, Hobbes is the philosophical defender of what government philosophy, of what government system? That's right, absolutism, I'm hoping. So he's a philosophical defender of absolutism. He felt that people were naturally bad, that our state of nature was quarrelsome, that we were evil and greedy. His book, The Leviathan, was published in 1651. Does anybody remember during what event, during what era he was writing and publishing? Anybody? Anybody? The English Civil War, correct? He was a defender of the Stuart monarchy. Now, in his book, he said that our fear of each other and our desire for law and order, our desire for protection, made people come to a contract with the government. Essentially, people are surrendering our rights to a ruler in exchange for protection. And he believed that rulers had to have absolute authority to maintain order. In other words, one leader having absolute authority was the only way to achieve natural law. Now, this is the key way to understand Hobbes. To Hobbes, the dangers of anarchy, that is, the dangers of disorder and no law and order, the dangers of anarchy are greater than the dangers of tyranny. Tyranny meaning one bad ruler ruling over everybody, controlling everything in a bad way. So to Hobbes, the dangers of anarchy are greater than the dangers of tyranny. Now I want you to take a moment and talk about Hobbes and natural law. How does he connect to this theory of natural law that we talked about up here? Go ahead. Now, Hobbes, again, like I said up here, is pre-Enlightenment. He is a pre-Enlightenment thinker. And he is going to have a major influence on all political thinkers that come after him, regardless of whether they support democracy, absolutism, constitutional, whatever it is. He has an influence on all political thinkers. And one of the big reasons this is because he used secular arguments. He did not use divine right. He was using reason. And that's what was needed to justify government, not divine right. He established that government is man-made, that is made for man, by man. And this becomes a normal part of political thought. This becomes a given for everybody. The state needs to be justified, and it needs to be justified using reason. That is Hobbes' contribution. And we describe this by saying he's the first to develop the concept of the social contract, which we've talked about. Again, little s, little c, because he didn't use those words. But the concept of the social contract, this agreement between the governed and the governing, that we give up rights in exchange for protection, using reason and secular arguments, is the key to this. And again, I just want to emphasize that he is not an Enlightenment thinker. He is pre-Enlightenment. If you're making a list of Enlightenment thinkers, he is not on it. But he forms the basis, the intellectual base, for everything that comes after him. So now, let's talk about John Locke. John Locke is an Enlightenment thinker. He is one of the biggest Enlightenment thinkers that we have, that we talk about. And he is the primary philosopher against absolutism. I don't want to necessarily say he's for democracy or for constitutional monarchy, because there's a lot of variance in his writings and in interpretations of his writings. But he is against absolutism. And his reason for this is, reason couldn't justify absolutism. That reason, if you looked at the logic of it, it just couldn't justify it. Now, where did this come from for Locke? Well, the same way that Hobbes felt we needed a strong ruler to keep us in line because we were evil and greedy, Locke's view of humanity influences his view of government as well. He felt man's state of nature was reasonable and moral, and so all we needed was a limited authority to sort out our problems. We didn't need a strong, absolute, total government. A government that had limited authority, limited political power, was all we needed to sort out our problems. Now, Locke wrote about the idea of the tabula rasa. This means blank slate, is what it's Latin for. Essentially, whereas Hobbes believed we are all born evil, Locke believed we are born a blank slate, and our life is determined by our experiences. And especially with education, we can be good. We are naturally good. We are a blank slate, not evil. And education can help us improve. Now, getting into his idea of natural law, he is actually going to define natural law more clearly than that vague concept that we had up here. Locke is going to define the concept of natural rights. He says our natural rights, these are rights we are born with, that every single person on the planet is born with. Oh, by planet I mean white men, according to Locke, but that's a different issue. Natural rights are a right to life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote our document, he changed it to pursuit of happiness because it sounded better, and so we didn't sound so greedy. It's the basis, the natural rights are life, liberty, and property. Because, once again, what's the source of wealth in England and really everywhere at this point? Land. So, I want you to take a second and bring this together. If our natural rights are life, liberty, and property, and Locke believes in a limited government, how does this tie into natural law? This is a really tough question. So again, how can we tie the idea of natural rights and limited government into Locke's view of natural law? See what you come up with. Okay, I'm going to spell it out for you. What Locke believed is that if the government protected our natural rights, it has achieved, or at least approached, natural law. That's all the government has to do in Locke's mind, is protect our natural rights, life, liberty, and property. If it does that, it is achieving or approaching natural law. Now, Locke's major work is the Two Treatises of Government. That is his major work. But a lot of his ideas are found in a lot of different places, so I don't want you to think it's just in the Two Treatises of Government. Essentially, what he describes over a lifetime of work is that people set up a government under contract to enforce the natural rights of everybody. And he did use the phrase social contract. So people set up a government to protect, to enforce the natural rights of everybody. But this contract, according to Locke, is not unconditional. Both sides have responsibilities. The people must be reasonable. Now, to Locke, that wasn't a challenge because he believed that's how we naturally were. The government had a bigger issue, bigger challenge, bigger responsibility. The government had to protect our natural rights, which is a big job, but that's all he wanted them to do. That's all he thought they should do, was just protect our right to life, liberty, and property. Now you notice, he didn't say it had to protect our possession of this property. It had to protect our right to it. Now, if the government doesn't uphold its responsibility, the people have the right, nay, the responsibility, to rebel. Locke used the word to reconsider the government. If the government doesn't uphold protecting our natural rights, the people have the responsibility to rebel, to reconsider. This is a big idea. Now, Locke understood the right to resist was dangerous because, some would argue, Hobbes, that was risking tyranny. But according to Locke, that was less dangerous than tyranny. Did I say that right? The right to resist could lead to anarchy. I hope I said that right. The right to resist was dangerous because it could lead to anarchy, but it was less dangerous than tyranny, which Locke thought was incredibly dangerous against reasonable people. So, even though he thought this right to resist was dangerous, we're talking about reasonable people here, so they're not going to rebel just for no reason. They're going to wait till there's good cause. That's what I have as the plus. We're talking about reasonable people here. And so he's not worried about them rebelling for no reason. Jefferson used the quote, Jefferson takes Locke to like the nth degree. Jefferson actually said, the tree of liberty must be refreshed with the blood of tyrants. And so Jefferson, taking that to the nth degree, believes that the only way to achieve liberty was to make sure that tyranny was completely eliminated. And that's just taking Locke to kind of the next big conclusion, the next big step. Now we're almost done here, but I want you to take a moment and talk with your partner about Locke and make sure you understand him. Okay, now very quickly, Locke's influence is most felt in the British colonies and most specifically in America. That is where his ideas take root more than anywhere else in the world. And his ideas are going to make revolution against a monarch a sign of progress rather than a reaction, rather than just a medieval reaction against a king, rather than just a many versus one or acting in strictly self-interest. This is a sign of progress. This is tied into modernity. This is intellectual justification for rebellion. Because again, it's a sign of progress rather than just a medieval reaction. And so what Locke's works do is they give new prestige to constitutional principles, because it's making these ideas reasonable. Nobody has had a democracy. Nobody has had constitutional ideas like this, but now he's using reason to justify them, and he's using man's ideas and man's concepts, not divine right. It's not God saying this is right. It's not God appointing this leader. Man and reason are justifying these things. And so that is our conversation about natural law, Hobbes and Locke. Now, at the beginning we said we want to understand Hobbes and Locke's contribution to the Enlightenment and be able to compare and contrast them both. So take a moment with your partner now, looking over everything we've said in the last 22 minutes, and talk about what Hobbes and Locke's contributions to the Enlightenment were, and then compare and contrast them. And I will check out now and see you guys next time.